Welcome to the Let's Talk Politics Alabama podcast with your host, Daniel Stover and Russ Sanders, where we take a look at Alabama politics like a drive down I-65 from North Alabama to the state capital in Montgomery and all the way to the Sugar Sand Coast.
I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience.
We choose truth over facts.
I don't want to speak negatively. I said, though, that if I lose this election, maybe I'll end up moving to Alabama.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming back and joining us on another episode of the Let's Talk Politics Alabama podcast. Sitting in for Russ tonight is our good buddy, Proncy Robertson. I should say honorable good buddy, Proncy Robertson. Thanks for sitting in while Russ is on military duties for the week, Proncy.
Thanks, Daniel. Proud of Russ for his service, and appreciate you calling me and asking me to join you again.
It was the last seconds, though.
That's right. I'm last resort. I'm not first pick, right?
That's right. Hey, while I'm thinking about it too, I've heard people kind of, I guess, poking fun of you for your name, whether your mama was mad at you or what, about giving you the name Proncy. So I'm going to give you a second and tell that story right quick for us.
Well, I don't know why anybody be making fun of somebody for their name. I mean, what is this? But it's not like I had a pick. With that being said, it was my it's kind of like making fun of me for my eye color. What different, I couldn't do anything about that. But it was my great grandfather's name, Proncy Robertson, or Proncy Bailey. And there was a couple of us in the family, out of those 5 generations there before it got to me. I think there were at least 2 others who were named Proncy as well as part of their name. Both of them were referred to as PD, okay, Proncy and whatever their middle name was. But each of us, if I'm not mistaken, were named, he was Proncy David Bailey, and mine is Proncy David Robertson. And so he was my grandmother's father, and died in his early 40s. And of course, they thought a lot of him, his family, and paid tribute to him by naming me after him. And I'm very proud of that heritage. It's supposedly an old family name from his side of the family that goes back another 5 generations to a surname of Prance, which is the story I'm told, an old Scott-Irish name, surname of Prance. So he was named Proncy. Like nowadays we'll name, a daughter Bailey or something after, grandma's maiden name or something like that, or mother's maiden name. Similar thing happened. They named him Proncy after that old family name of Prance. And then it was passed down to me 5 generations later. So it's just a family name. My mother still doesn't like it any more than, some people you say make fun of it. But my dad apparently insisted. And so most of my really all of my childhood, people I went to elementary school, high school with, knew me by my middle name, David. And when I joined the military, like Russ, what happens when you join the military?
They don't give you a choice.
No, you go by first name, middle initial, last name. So I was immediately Proncy D. Robertson. And then so I wore that for 4 years. And after hearing that for 4 years and it becoming almost like a nickname, as you can imagine, calling me Proncy, even though I struggled in those years. Hey, my name's David. Call me David. People continue to call me Proncy. And so there in my early 20s, eventually, I guess I gave in to, it became like a nickname. Everybody calling me that. And eventually more and more folks begin to know me as that. And as a police officer, then I used that name, Proncy Robertson, in Decatur, and so be it. Here I am. My political consultant, when I first told her my name, said, "Well, you don't even need a last name. We should just put that on the signs, right?"
It's
one of those. It's one of those family curses.
Well, it's definitely a standout name there. Like she said, you don't really need your last name on there. Everybody's going to know you by Proncy. That's the only Proncy that I know. So, all right.
It's an honor to carry it just because it was my great grandfather's name. And so, while it's a little unusual, again, I don't recommend naming your child that, or anything that unusual. Because it's probably a rough day and time to carry a unique name like that.
Well, there was that song, "A Boy Named Sue." So
there you go. Yeah, same type of concept.
All right. Well, tonight, Russ and I had talking a little bit more about primary versus the general election and what those mean, and what's the difference in it. What gets us to a runoff? What do all those runoffs mean? How do we get there? One thing that I know that we've talked about, both being on the state executive committee, is I think both parties have pushed to have a closed primary where you would have to declare your affiliation before you even went to the ballot box. But let's back up and let's talk about both of us having, me being the current chairman, you being past chairman. What's the difference in the primary and the general election? Starting off the primary, it's, I think we said this before. It's basically like you're picking that club's person to represent them in the general. It's not necessarily that's the person that's going to win the general, even though we've become a pretty much one party state. But you're basically picking the person that's going to represent the party in the general election. I know, Proncy, you represented the Republican Party, and Mr. Jones represented the Democrat Party in the general election. But then you've run into situations where we've had one of the main offices that we've had contention in the primary has been the superintendent's race. We ended up, I want to think at one point we had maybe 4 in 1 year, one cycle in just the superintendent's race. I know we've had 3 or 4 in one district for the county commission even. So that's the reason why, you may be asking, well, why is it that I get asked about what political party I prefer when I go in to vote? Well, that's the reason. It's one or the other. You say, well, I'm a libertarian or I'm an independent. Can I say, no, I don't want either party? Well, yeah, you can do that. But guess what? That's the 2-party system that we have. And if you go, I'm a libertarian and I want to vote libertarian, well, we don't have a libertarian in the primary. So you're not going to end up being able to vote in that primary. Is that pretty plain what I said, Proncy, or you need to add something?
Well, I think there is a lot of people still confused about this, the difference in the primary and the general election, Daniel. I hear it all the time that people are confused about this issue. And the simplest way is just what you said, is it's basically the 2 teams picking their team, if you will. You got Democrat, Republican. And it's, the analogy I've used with some people, it's like Alabama and Auburn. Each team in their, spring practice and their practices, they are picking a quarterback for each team, or a wide receiver to play that starting position. So each of those positions on their team that they plan to run, they get to pick who that person is. Okay. For who's going to be quarterback at Auburn, who's going to be quarterback at Alabama. And the primary is really about the preseason, if you will, before the general election. That's the way I've tried to explain it to a lot of people. So when we have the obviously, what happens is people come to the party, and we've talked about this before, I think here. I know you and Russ have talked about how people come to you and qualify, right, for their candidacy for whatever office. They meet the minimum requirements, and they usually pay a qualifying fee to that party to say, I want to run on the Republican ticket, or I want to run on the Democratic ticket.
Right.
In other words, they're candidating to be that quarterback for that position, right? And then if there's multiple people that want that same position for that team, we have to have the primary election, and those people run against each other. Years ago in Lawrence County, it was almost all one team, right? It was almost all Democrat. And so pretty much anybody who ran was on the Democrat ballot, okay, in the primary. And so when people went to vote, there barely was, or maybe there wasn't even a Republican ticket at all, right? Or a primary at all.
Yep.
And so people went in and they picked their candidates from that Democrat list. Well, over time, that kind of shifted. And for a few years there, we had a Democrat and a Republican primary. Now it's almost the other way, where almost everybody who wants to run is they're challenging each other for those Republican positions. And you may have one or two Democrats that are not necessarily running for the same position, only one for each spot, in other words. So if there's only one candidate in that Democrat primary, they win, right? They become if there's only one guy trying to win quarterback, he's the quarterback, right? And but on this side, you got four people challenging for the quarterback. Well, they have to challenge against each other, he or she. So that primary is just about going and picking those key people, those key positions to run against each other when we put the teams head to head in the general. And the primary election, obviously this year, people will qualify to run in January, right?
Right.
And then the election, the primary election for those two teams to pick their main positions is May. I think is it May 24th this year is the official date, I think, last week in May.
Unless y'all go into special session and change that.
Change it. Yeah, and I'm not anticipating that happening. So that last week of May, we'll go to the polls. And when you walk in there, they're going to ask you, okay, which team ballot do you want to pick off of? You say, well, I'm Democrat. They're going to hand you a ballot that only has those Democrat candidates that are running for those positions.
Mm-hmm.
You won't even see the Republican candidates, or they'll hand you a Republican ticket if you say Republican. And again, there might be 4 on there for my job. There might be 3 on there for the sheriff. There might be 2 for, the different county commission positions. And you would pick which one of those you want to be the Republican representative for those particular positions. And whoever wins those primary races then challenges whoever won on the Democrat party, either by vote or by default, right? Because they're the only ones in the race. And then we'll run against each other as far as Republican and Democrat until we get to the general election, which will be the first week in November of 2022.
And now, one reason that there's such a space between when the primary is and when the general is unless you get 50% plus 1, you end up if there's more than two people in that primary, say if there's three people in there, unless one of those gets 50% plus one, then you end up with a runoff.
That's right. And we're talking about during the primary, let's say on that Republican ballot, you said, let's say there's three people running for sheriff, and you got 23%, 42%, 38%. Nobody got more than 50%. All right.
Yep.
And therefore the top two will run against each other in a runoff, a primary runoff. And that's when it comes into play with what you were talking about. See, why we have a closed primary is whichever one of those primaries you voted in the first time up on May 24th, when sometime probably in late June or the 1st of July, but it's usually about 6 weeks later, right?
Yeah.
So when we do the runoff for any of those positions that are needed, if you voted Democrat, you can't come over here and pick one of these candidates. Okay? The reason why is, what would you do? Obviously, you would come over here and try to pick the weakest candidate of the two to try to make sure they win.
That's
and
right.
then run your guy against them in the fall. So to keep that from happening, and vice versa, you could have that happen where all the Republicans jumped over here. There's two Democrats running off. We all go over there and vote for the person we think we can beat the easiest, make sure they win the primary, and then our candidate has the advantage going into the fall. So you don't want that to happen. Neither party wants that to happen. And
right.
That's why we have a closed primary election, which means when you go in there and you declare on May the 24th, I'm either a Democrat or I am a Republican, then when if we have a runoff in any of those races, they keep a list of who voted in each one. And that's why you sign the book. And when you come back in, they will confirm that you voted in the Republican runoff or primary if you're going to vote in the Republican runoff. And so that, again, that was just passed, I think, 2017.
Yeah.
So we nailed that down.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily a closed primary. It's kind of a semi-closed primary, because a closed primary would be kind of like almost like the caucuses and stuff that you see up north, where if it was a fully closed primary, you would have to declare what team in your example there you're batting for at the beginning when you register to vote, or you would have to take and declare that prior to going to cast your primary ballot.
That's right. And so in Alabama, right up until the point that you pick one of those two ballots at the primary date, you can campaign for or like or whatever any candidate you want to, okay, on either side. But as soon as you pick one of those, it only applies if there is a runoff.
Right.
Okay? Now, once it gets to the general election, all those candidates, Democrat and Republican, will all be on the same ballot. So when you get there, you can do a couple of different things when you get that general election, right, Dan? You can either, they got that block at the top that says straight ticket. You can vote all Republican or all Democrat. And what that would mean is every candidate down the ballot that is in that party, you are picking them as your guy or gal.
And that being said, you don't have to go pick each individual person. If you check off and say, I'm going to vote, all Democrat, vote party line Democrat up here, but say I want to vote for Max Sanders for sheriff. If you're in the general election, you can go down there and mark Max Sanders for general election, and that vote counts for Max instead of the Democrat. So that's something a lot of people don't understand either. There's a, I don't have to go through and pick every single box.
That's right. So the way it works is that top box up there, Republican or Democrat, I can check either one of them I want. But let's say I pick Republican up there at the top. Then I can still, as you said, go down the ballot and let's say there's a Democrat somewhere that I want to vote for in a particular race. I
Mhm.
could do that, and that will override that one block.
Right.
Everything else will stay Republican. Okay. Or if I just check that top box Republican, every race I will have voted Republican,
Right.
and vice versa for Democrats. So you're right. A lot of people are confused about that and do not understand the way that works. But so it's two completely different elections here. Primary is each team picking their person for those particular offices. The general is then those two sides running against each other. That's when you got Democrat against Republican. And that's also when you get those independent candidates,
Mhm.
those libertarian you're talking about, things like that, third party, they're called. Those
Right.
third party candidates, they will be on the general ballot.
Mhm.
So, and how do they get on there? Have we talked about that? You would have to get so
Petition.
many. Yeah, you have to petition. You have to get so many signatures based upon the number of people who voted in the last general election. You have to get a certain percentage of those voters to sign saying, yes, we want you on the ballot as an independent. And if they did that, then your name would appear. There would be a Democrat, there would be a Republican, and then there would be the independent or the libertarian or whatever constitutional party that happened to get their signatures that they needed to get on the ballot.
And now that, if I'm not mistaken, and we're going to get Greg Dutton on here one day, and I'm sure he'll correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure that that is, say, if it's a commission seat, it's in that district. If it was for representative, it's the whole District 7 that you represent. All of those voters in that district. If it's a statewide thing,
right. I see what
it's-
you're saying. Mhm.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
percentage of the statewide voters if you're trying to do that at state level. That's the reason you don't see very many people do that past the local level, because it becomes
That's right.
extremely hard to make that happen. But,
That's right.
there have been those instances when it has happened, like in Alaska. There was a congresswoman that was elected that way. Actually, I think
Well-
she was more of a write-in than a third-party candidate.
And that's it's a very good point, Daniel, in the sense that, for instance, in, my house district, there's approximately 45,000 people in that district that are in 4 counties.
Mhm.
So, I actually wrap over into Morgan, Lawrence, Franklin, and Winston County. So you would need a percentage of the voters in each one of those counties in that district that voted in the last election to sign their name that they wanted you on the ballot in
Right.
order to run as an independent for this seat. So it is very difficult. And that's why most people do declare with a party, either, when I say a party, either the Democrat or Republican Party. So a lot of people, say, why don't more people run independent? It's difficult to do that.
It's not easy at all. I know we've had a couple here locally do that, but it's literally been within a district of county commission. It's not
Right.
been a,
Countywide race or
or
Larger.
a district race. Because I forget the percentage. I'll have to get that from Greg at some point. But it's not a small percentage when you really think about it.
Mhm. Well, and you can think about how hard that is. I know in Lawrence County, for instance, we're still a wet county, right? And I think
Mhm.
it's something like you need the signatures of like 3% of the last general election voters
Mhm.
to get it on the ballot to vote to go wet or dry in the county. And I know a number of people have tried to do that over the last couple of decades. And if I'm not mistaken, that's only They've only voted on it once.
Mhm.
So it's pretty difficult to get that many individuals. And it's not just a name, just a signature where I could go down through there and sign Daniel Stover 18 times.
Yep.
I have to have a signature and an address from a registered voter
Mhm.
in that district that the Board of Registrars can confirm that they are a registered voter within that district or that jurisdiction.
Yes, that's one of those things that the Board of Registrars is responsible for, is verifying that those are actual voters.
That's right.
Um,
And that becomes a problem a lot of times because a lot of people who do like a wet dry referendum will put those petitions out like in grocery stores and things like that, or the counter of the corner store, and people will sign them. But if they didn't put an address, or when they check if that person's not registered to vote at the courthouse with the Board of Registrars, then that signature is stricken.
Yep.
So you lose a percentage of them right there.
mhm. All right. Well, I guess that hopefully we've beat that dead horse pretty good there. I'm not sure. I'm sure there's more
Well,
questions.
I think it's important. That's a very important subject. I during this election time, and we're already into it, I get a lot of questions about that from people who, sometimes people within our party that are very involved don't necessarily understand a lot of what we just talked about.
Right. Hey, and the thing is, if you don't know, ask questions.
That's right.
I guarantee you that nobody that's involved in the election process is going to take and tell you, no, I'm not going to give you that answer, because whether you want to vote on the Democrat side or the Republican side, doesn't matter. Our main focus is to get people out to vote. That's your right, your constitutional right, and that's what we want to see.
Absolutely.
So Russ and I had planned on starting a new little thing this week, and then he had to run into guard duty there. But we were going to start the dad joke of the week. So Bronzy, how do you get a country girl? How do you get her attention?
Well, that's a good question. I've got a country girl. She's pretty hard to keep her attention most of the time, but because she's busy. I don't know, Dan. How do I get a country girl's attention?
A tractor. Or in Christy's case, it was just the dad joke of the day, of the week.
All right.
Yeah, and in your wife's case, it might be a fur baby, but
New
right.
animal would probably help.
Yeah, there you go. Anything with fur and Christie's on it, like white on rice, And no, that was not racist.
That's right.
One other thing there's two other things that I wanted to touch on. Speaking of our probate judge, Greg Dutton, did you hear about this little thing that's going on with the archives? They are having a murder mystery, and somebody has killed Greg Button. I think that Greg Button.
Okay.
They changed the names to keep everybody safe. Innocent. Yeah, we're talking about politicians here. Nobody's innocent, right?
Right.
But if you get a chance, go to the archives Facebook page and check it out. They've got cartoons of Max Sanders and Greg Dutton and the Moulton police chief. And honestly, my guess is that Sandra Ligon has to be the guilty party that killed Greg Button, because it was with a red velvet cake. and Greg cannot refuse Sandra's cooking.
That's a pretty good theory.
And who knows, that might have been the body that they found behind the laundromat back a few weeks ago. Who knows?
Oh my goodness. Don't bring that up, chair.
I'm sure Moulton Police Department's loving that comment right now. So, but that brings me to my second thing that I wanted to bring up tonight. And trying not to run too long here, but we talk about a lot of this stuff and we talk about how to be involved in the parties, but where do we get that information? Now, we get a lot of our information from our party meetings because we have the commissioners and the school board members and the judges and our esteemed representative with us there to tell us a lot of this stuff. But, maybe you're not wanting to come to that meeting, but the other part that you can go to is the county commission meeting. And honestly, it was kind of sad last night. There may have been a dozen or so people in the crowd at the Board of Education meeting. And
I'm surprised there's that many. A couple times I've been there, it's probably half of that.
I was one of those. But, just some things that came through that meeting. Did you know that we're going to spend $160,000 to provide SROs for our schools this year? We look at where's our tax money going? Well, right there's one thing. There was a big discussion last night too of Moulton Elementary. Yes, we've got money that's going. I think you said that there's, what was it, $2 million or something that was allocated to the county, and each school got to kind of pick what they wanted to do with that. Is that right?
Well, you're talking about the last year, the state did a bond issue for the schools for capital improvements.
Right.
And it was either 1.2 or 2.1. I'm a little dyslexic tonight. $billion that we set out for the schools to for capital improvements. That money was divided among the school districts based upon their student population, and then each district divided that among the school. I mean, the individual schools within the district the same way. If I'm not mistaken, Lawrence County, for instance, got somewhere between $5-6 million, and so that would have been divided among the schools in Lawrence County for specific capital improvements. And I do know enough about locally, just from talking to the superintendents in each of the counties, that they spent time working with the individual principals, the administrators at each of the school campuses to see what they wanted to spend the money on. I think most of them chose some type of, in Lawrence County, some type of athletic facility or enhancement there. For instance, I think Hatton, there's an indoor practice facility that they're looking at doing. But the schools help to make those decisions. It wasn't just some arbitrary, decision made about what each one would get from the central or from the board, is my understanding.
Yeah, I know John Brett said last night that, he stayed out of picking colors for sure. So y'all cannot blame him for picking the colors on any of these buildings that are being built. So, but that brings up the Moulton Elementary School. I'm a graduate of Moulton Elementary School. I don't know if that's really that big of a deal, but that's where I went to school, elementary school. And I remember going up those stairs into that old building, and that building was old when I was there, and it's still there. Well, got news for y'all. They're fixing to bulldoze it. they're going to tear down a large chunk of that building, and they're going to build a new section where the little parking area is now for the teachers. But they said that it was roughly 26,000 square foot of new building that they're going to put in place. And the square footage, the bid that, we talk about the economy and it's starting to get back, but we cannot find workers. And an example of that was they had, I think it was 15 general contractors that they had qualify to place a bid for the construction.
Mhm.
They only had 2 show up on bid day, and they only had 1 electrical contractor to show up. So guess what? That electrical contractor automatically gets it because he was the only one that showed up. But I think it was running, I think I heard $60 a square foot just for the electrical. And overall, they had broke it down in the meeting last night. It's $261 per square foot of building space that the county's going to be paying. And that, I did get confirmation on this earlier, but that money is coming from refinancing existing bonds. So it'll be local money that is
Okay.
building that school. And they have budgeted $6 million to build that building. And right now they're coming in at 6.8. And they have already went back to the contractor and the architect to have it value engineered and see what can be cut, because the state allows them to ask up to 10% be cut. So they've already went back and asked that to be done to see if they can get that down. But I mean, you take a look at the cost of building materials right now, it's still sky high. I mean,
Yes.
plywood's still sitting there at $40 to $60 a sheet. And, 2 years ago, it was $20 a sheet. So, something though that I think that our county can be proud of is, and I guess it's kind of a good problem, but we now have a virtual / blended signature school. And this year, there are 261 students already enrolled in that school. So that's good for the county. Another thing that they talked about is COVID testing. If you're a parent, you've already gotten the notice from the school saying, hey, this is what we're doing this year and everything. One thing that they talked about was COVID testing, that it has to be a medical test from the doctor, not one of these home tests. And that's kind of one of those things of they need to make sure that the test is not being manipulated so somebody can play football on Friday. Unfortunately, I guess there are people out there that would try to do that. So, unfortunately. And then one other thing that they discussed is, last year there was, I believe, 40 buses, they said, that had Wi-Fi put on them in case that we had a situation where we had to take and suspend school for a week or 2 weeks because of COVID. Those 40 buses would be set up around the county to provide internet for students to be able to do their homework. Well, there's good news. Those 40 buses, that contract's getting renewed, and they're adding 40 more, which will pretty much cover all of the buses in Lawrence County, will now have Wi-Fi on them. So if your kid's a real quick study and can get their homework done on the bus ride home, they've got Wi-Fi to be able to do that. They'll have Wi-Fi too for their cell phones, of course. And I guess the bigger thing is, going on a field trip, your teacher can assign stuff to do during the trip. Everybody loves that, right?
Well, and they park those buses too, Dan, in strategic places at night and on the weekends, as you said, and they can they're hot spots. It's not just on the bus, obviously.
Right.
So anything within several hundred feet of that bus, so they could park it in the school parking lot. I think that's what a lot of them did last year, or a church parking lot in the community. I know there was one out here, all the way out here in Mount Hope at Old Town Creek. If you went by there every night, you'd see the bus in the parking lot. And the reason for that is it's a hot spot. And if you got close to it, you would see that Wi-Fi come up on your phone or on your laptop so that you could use that free internet. If you didn't have any other source of internet, it was at least a way to get something done, right? So,
right.
Yeah. And most of those were paid for those districts through a state program that, through the COVID money that rolled down from the federal government. So those are not local, tax dollars necessarily that's being spent on that. Those are federal COVID relief fees.
Well, and I know there was one set up out at Pleasant Grove, and I went by there one day. I forget why I was out that direction, but I remember seeing several cars parked around it there, and it was getting used. So I think all of that is great things coming out of our county. We may not all agree about the COVID stuff or a mask or whatever, but the fact that we're making sure all of our campuses have SROs, we're getting a new building at Moulton Elementary School, which is now probably the oldest building in our school system. We've got a new signature school that is a virtual school or a blended school. I think that's great. The county had already been pushing in that direction even before COVID, and we're adding more Wi-Fi to buses that can be used, not just for COVID, but just parked out there in general for the time being until we get a better situation.
Well, and with that bus Wi-Fi, I say, well, what good is that once this COVID issue is over? So forth. But if you have Wi-Fi on the bus, there's lots of other things you could do too. You could add a cloud-based camera to that bus that you could monitor if the bus has an issue. They could see from central office, for instance, or back at the school for the principal to actually view either where the bus is going or inside the bus, right? And record those things. So if there's an incident or an issue, that they could be there for to look back at that incident and see what happened. So that's a good thing. You can also, with that Wi-Fi GPS, track that bus. So think about if it got lost, it was hijacked, Lord forbid, or something like we had down in Lee County that few years ago. You could locate that bus if it had that internet service like that. And so there's a number of things that can be done with that. Something else you mentioned, Dan, about the SROs and that cost of it. $160,000 may sound like a lot, but I'm sure that's at least enough SROs cover our primary high schools, things like that. I know just from my experience of working in Decatur with the SRO program, it was $800,000 a year that the city of Decatur spends on the SRO unit, which, as you know, I supervised at one time. So got a pretty good idea of what that costs and the budget of that every year from my personal experience there. So if they're getting covered our high schools for $160,000, they're really working well with the sheriff and the schools as a partnership there to save us as much as possible on the funding. And having said that, I don't think you can put a value on the safety of our children. And so that if we're going to be spending money somewhere, that's a good spot to put it.
Yeah, I've got one that's in the school system now, and one that'll be starting next year. And yeah, 160,000 is, you know, when it comes to school safety, that's kind of a drop in the bucket. So,
Yep. It's a no-brainer, right?
mhm.
So,
All right.
and I would hope that folks would feel that way. Appreciate them working on that. And it takes a partnership between our, in this case, our county sheriff, Moulton Police Department, as well as the school system to be able to cooperate and work together to make that happen.
Yep. All right. Well, just to give y'all kind of an idea of what's coming up in their future podcasts here. I've got to get some people scheduled here, but I have talked to Judge Matt Friday about coming on, our local probate judge, Greg Dutton, our county superintendent, John Brett Smith. We're going to get him in here, you know, maybe after school gets started good, give him a couple of weeks to get settled down. Secretary of State, John Merrill, will be joining us at some point. One that I'm sure everybody is trying to watch, Judge Mark Craig and Assistant DA Callie Waldrop will both be joining us on different nights, but they'll both be joining us. You know, they're both running for circuit judge in Lawrence County. So, and then I'm sure that we'll have several other guests coming up, but those are just the ones that I've got laid out already. And we know will be coming up before long. So, Broncy, thanks for joining me tonight and picking up Russ's slack there. We'll
My pleasure. I'm no Russ Sanders now, but you know, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you, and you know, hopefully answer some questions that's worth knowing some details about. You know, I think the election stuff we covered is very important, Daniel, for folks, especially the timing here going into the elections, that we all you know, understand how our system works and participate in that. You said that earlier. Mm-hmm. And so I would really encourage folks to get involved. You know, I see, just like you and everybody else, I see all kinds of social media comments. And sometimes, you know, it's just like, you know, hand to the face, wondering what in the world, you know, that's, I don't know where that came from. You know, mm-hmm. People are very confused a lot of times about information and getting good information. It's really easy to complain and to, you know, to say, why ain't this done? Why isn't that done? Why does this happen this way? It's another to try to find truth and to be able to articulate that to one another. And mm-hmm. Truth ain't always fun. It's not funny, but it's something that we all need to invest in. And right. It would make our all of our lives more productive, I think. Yeah. So appreciate the opportunity to be able to participate in this and what you guys are trying to do with this little podcast.
Well, that being said, you know, if you're listening to us on one of the podcast apps, make sure that you give us 5 stars on there. It helps us to keep promoting our channel here. If you're listening to us or watching us on YouTube, hey, thank you. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell to get notifications when we make our uploads. We try to get this filmed during the week and then get it posted on Friday morning sometime. So just so this, y'all know our routine that we're trying to get in. Let's see, is there anything else? Oh, if you're interested in coming to the Lawrence County Republican meeting, we're going to be meeting, well, actually, I should have made this announcement last week, but we'll be meeting this Thursday night, and we meet the second Thursday of each month at 6:30 at Mel's Steakhouse. And if somebody will give me an idea of when the Democrats meet, we'll put that out there for everybody to hear too. So, but thanks for tuning in and watching us or listening to us, and I hope you got something out of this. And Until next time, y'all be safe, and Proncy, I'll give you the last word.
Again, just want to thank you for allowing me to participate, Daniel. Y'all have a great night. Enjoy yourself.
All right. See y'all.